Tonight we're going to be debuting a string quartet that I wrote this summer, and it's based on my grandmother collected, well, my grandmother had letters between 1939 and 1945 that she kept that were just letters between women. And I had these letters for so long, and I started to go through them and started to hear all these women's stories in different ways that in some ways seem very mundane. You know, it's like what was happening in their days, and but I found so much resiliency in so many of these letters. And so this first one happens to come from Gary, Indiana. This is, it's where Sxip's parents are both from. And Gary, Indiana is about like 25 miles south of Chicago, and it's a steel industry town. Sxip's dad worked at
steel.
Yeah. And at this time, it was like one of the most diverse places. Like people like my grandmother's friend Rinda Johnson. She moved there because she was a farm girl from Iowa. It's 1939. There's not a lot of work. There's not a lot of things happening. And so they had moved, and immigrants from all over the world. Sxip's family's from Albania. But there was tons of people from Eastern Europe and Mexico, and tons of black people from the South that were just done with the South, settling in Gary, Indiana. So this little town, rapid growth overnight in some ways. So this farm girl from Iowa ends up going to Gary, Indiana with her husband and their children, and they start writing letters back and forth to my grandmother. And so you'll notice this is how every letter is addressed to my grandmother, Mrs. Carl Alden. Her name is Lila Bell Francis, a beautiful name, but you won't ever see that on a letter. It's Mrs. Carl Alden. And I say that because I'm interested in kind of looking at, some of the systems that were in place that on the surface might seem very unjust, and I'm kind of curious if there's another way, something else that hasn't been seen or something that hasn't been told. And so I got interested in kind of understanding what it might have been like, the role of a woman at this time. I think about, like, if you ever look up and you see a flock of geese, it's very tempting to look at the head bird and think, oh, for sure, that's the bird that's leading the flock. But as it turns out, it's a self-organized system. And it's not that bird leading, it's actually just the most efficient way to get to where they're going with that formation. It's like 70% faster to fly like that, and they can see better. So I think about that, and my grandmother, she's one of 14 kids, and she had 7 kids of her own, and married my grandfather, who was a farmer, and you know, she would have loved to have gone to college. She would have loved to have a job outside of her home, but she stayed in the home. And she would have always said that her marriage was a partnership, like an equal partnership, not like an imbalanced partnership. She would have said that was a partnership. And it reminds me of Eleanor Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt was the ethos of Eleanor Roosevelt was such a fabric of my grandmother's generation. And she had 2 quotes that I really love. We shape ourselves and we shape our lives. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. And I think that my grandmother and of that generation, people really lived by that ethos. So this letter that is based on from Rinda, it's kind of, she's like gently asking the question, what's it supposed to feel like to be a young woman? And it's at a time where she thought, like, I thought we were gonna, get married and have that family thing where you have dinners all the time. But as it turns out, her husband was at the factory for 14 plus hours, and she would be home alone, and she just thought it would look so much different. And so she keeps her head up. She keeps her head up. She writes her letters. She cans her food. She crochets, and she says this in letters to my grandmother. And I think they're so resilient, and I try to imagine, like, what might have it been like to be her husband walking into a room and to be instantly greeted with respect and admiration. And then what might have it been like to be her walking into a room and have to just keep your head held up high because you're not totally seen for all the things that you do. And thank you. It seemed to be working just fine without, but now I have this. So at that moment of her walking into a room, she's having to flex her inner inner strength of her resiliency. And so while it might have looked like her husband was winning all the admiration and respect, maybe she was flexing this muscle that was keeping her with her pride and keeping her strong. So in the words of one of my favorite poets from Dayton, Ohio, Jim Dwyer, he says, what matters most is what you turn love into after love has turned on you. Or what I might say in relation to this, what matters most is what you turn the system into after the system has turned on you. A young woman, all alone at night, I see him only before the door to work. He tarries in the country, still pack his lunch for the 4 to 12. I'm like a green widow, crochet daily, I can food like a man. What I do is for me, keep my pride, this town is crazy, everyone's from someplace else. It's all very exciting till you get used to it. Leaving us here all alone. When I think of home, I weep. The ache of loneliness races through my nights. When my family sleeps, I stay up, write my letters to keep my head from falling to the floor. Mother musical, and I'm really happy to be able to work with them. This is Holgate on the violin. Kenny, could you remind me your last name? Trotter, Kenny Trotter on the violin. This is Rima fan, who we have gone back so far together. She's a musical partner and such a dear sister to me. Sxip and Rima and I, yes, we played music all over the world together, and she's playing viola tonight. And this is Alden on the cello.